In January 2023, Mercury Marine walked into the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas and unveiled an electric outboard motor. Within 12 months, Mercury had expanded to 5 electric models and returned to CES to preview the most powerful yet. Meanwhile, Yamaha quietly acquired Torqeedo, a company with nearly 20 years of history and more than 250 patents in electric marine propulsion. Then, Suzuki announced plans for 5 electric marine models by 2030. Tohatsu entered the space through a partnership with Ilmor Marine. Honda showed prototypes at the Boot Düsseldorf. Brunswick, the company behind Mercury, Boston Whaler and Sea Ray, formally named electrification as one of the 4 pillars of its entire innovation strategy. 1 out of every 2 powerboats on the water in the United States runs a Mercury engine, and Mercury's parent company has staked its future on electricity. There is just one problem: most boaters don't want one. This is the story of how an entire industry made a massive, coordinated bet on a future its own customers haven't asked for, and what happens when the people building the product and the people buying it are living in completely different realities. To understand why every major marine brand moved at roughly the same time, you have to start somewhere uncomfortable. You see, gasoline outboard engines are a nearly perfect product. They have been refined for over 60 years, so they are powerful, reliable, and cheap relative to the performance they deliver. For example, a modern 4-stroke from Yamaha or Mercury is quieter, cleaner, and more fuel-efficient than anything that existed a decade ago. Then, in the early 2020s, the automotive industry pivoted toward electrification at a pace that surprised almost everyone, prompting governments in Europe to introduce emissions restrictions and California to signal stricter rules for small engines. Here is the actual problem. A gasoline outboard can be refueled in about 4 minutes at any marina fuel dock. The Mercury Avatar 110A, which is Mercury's most powerful electric outboard, takes approximately 10 hours to charge 2 depleted batteries using the integrated 1 kilowatt charger. With the portable 520-watt charger, it rises to 20 hours. Those are Mercury's own published figures. For a boater launching from a rural ramp with no shore power or wanting to go out 2 days in a row, 10 to 20 hours between uses is not a trade-off. It is a structural limitation, and that is before the power gap. You see, the Avatar 110E delivers 14.75 horsepower, approximately 15 horsepower, derived from 11,000 watts at the prop shaft. It is Mercury's most powerful electric outboard. Boating Magazine even confirmed that figure in their test review and called it a remarkable technical achievement. But the typical recreational fishing boat in the United States runs somewhere between 150 and 300 horsepower. Mercury's own marketing is honest about this. The Avatar lineup is explicitly positioned for pontoons, aluminum fishing boats, inflatables, and tenders, particularly on lakes with electric-only restrictions. But here is where the disconnect becomes structural. The boaters who use 150 to 300 horsepower are the core of the recreational market. They are the buyers who spend the most, trade up the most, and sustain the dealer networks the entire industry depends on. And those boaters are largely unmoved by the electric transition. Their objection is practical. They need to run 40 miles offshore or spend a full day on a large lake and get home safely. Ollie Taylor, founder and director of Marine Futures, identified the safety dimension that most industry marketing ignores entirely. If an electric car breaks down or runs out of energy, you can simply call roadside assistance and someone will come to help. On the sea, it's a very different position. You generally need a much higher level of built-in redundancy to have that safety margin. That is the objection the industry has not yet answered. Running out of charge in a parking lot is an inconvenience. Running out of power 3 miles offshore is an emergency. Dean Burnett, vice president of Yamaha's US Marine Business Unit, said it plainly in August 2025. We believe these electric solutions will continue to evolve, but today, the lower horsepower electric outboard options tend to have better application on the water. There is also an increased cost associated with electric propulsion versus traditional internal combustion engines. Charging infrastructure and the capacity of the grid will also continue to be an issue as more electric products enter the market. He added, "Electric sales have slowed down a bit over the last 12 to 18 months, but long-term, we expect to see continued growth in the segment." The people inside the industry know the consumer isn't ready, yet they are building toward a future they believe is coming anyway. You see, most criticism of the electric outboard push treats it as corporate virtue signaling, but that doesn't hold up. The decision to invest heavily in electric propulsion before mass market demand exists is a calculated structural bet. And when you look at the logic, it is not irrational. The auto industry provides the template. In 2012, Tesla delivered the Model S. Most automotive executives dismissed it. A decade later, every major automaker had pivoted billions toward electrification because being late to infrastructure, supply chains, and regulatory positioning was worse than the cost of early investment. Marine executives are watching that playbook and trying not to repeat the mistake of being last. Battery technology, on the other hand, follows a learning curve. The more units manufactured, the cheaper and more capable each generation becomes. If Yamaha, Mercury, and Torqeedo are producing electric outboards at scale now, they are building the patents, the supply chain relationships, and the manufacturing efficiency that will matter when the technology does reach performance and price parity. So the brands are not simply chasing optics, they are buying optionality, which is the right to compete in a market that may arrive in 3 years or 10, but is probably coming. The risk is not being wrong about the direction, the risk is the timing. And the cost in brand credibility, dealer patience, and consumer trust of arriving significantly before the market is ready is real. The real strategic problem is not that electric outboards don't work. For specific applications, many of them work well. Boating Magazine tested the Avator 110E on a Suntracker party barge 18 pontoon and described it as genuinely capable, quiet, responsive, with strong low-end torque and almost no throttle lag. But for electric-only lakes, for tender duty, for boaters who do not need range, the product delivers what it promises. The problem is that the industry is trying to sell transformation to people who feel no urgency to transform. Compare this to what happened with electric vehicles. Early EV adopters had a use case that was nearly ideal for electric: predictable daily commute, same route and destination every day, charge at home overnight. The infrastructure inconvenience was manageable because the behavior was predictable. Boating is the opposite use case in almost every dimension. Trips are irregular, distances vary widely. Many boaters launch from ramps with no shore power at all. And as Taylor observed, the safety stakes of running out of energy on the water are categorically different from running out on a road. Roxana Hagayeg, CMO at Ilmor Marine, noticed this firsthand in southern Florida. It's still too early, and the choices available to them are close to none. Consumers want to be able to sail to the Bahamas on their electric boats or be able to charge their boat fast. There is also a cultural dimension that industry marketing consistently underweights. Boating culture in North America is deeply attached to power and performance. The throttle response of a high horsepower outboard is part of the product. Silence is not a universal selling point. For many boaters, the sound and feel of combustion is not a problem to be solved, it is part of the experience they are paying for. The industry's response has been to frame electric as a complementary tier rather than a replacement, a new segment for a new kind of boater, younger and more sustainability-oriented. That framing may be right, but it also reveals the bet's most vulnerable assumption, and that is that a wave of new, sustainability-motivated boaters will materialize quickly enough to justify the scale of investment already made. So far, that wave has not arrived. Mercury's decision to debut the Avatar at CES rather than a boat show was deliberate. The intended audience was investors, regulators, and technology press, not the core boating customer. The result is a gap between how the product is talked about and what the core market experiences when they look at the spec sheet. When a boater encounters a CES Innovation Award and then discovers that the most powerful model produces 15 horsepower, that gap destroys trust faster than silence would have. The companies leading this transition have not produced a compelling electric option in the 50 to 150 horsepower range, which is where recreational boating volume actually lives. The gap between what is available and what most boaters need is enormous, and no bridge product exists at a competitive price point. Torqeedo, after nearly 20 years in business and with more than 250 patents, remained heavily concentrated in low-power and specialty applications before the Yamaha acquisition. The most established electric marine company in the world had not cracked the mainstream recreational market in 2 decades. That is the central problem. Most electric outboard marketing leads with environmental benefits, quiet operation, and lower maintenance costs. These are real, but they are not the primary objections. The primary objections are range, safety at sea, charging time, and price-to-capability ratio. An electric outboard that costs significantly more than a comparable gasoline motor, delivers a fraction of the operating range, takes 10 or more hours to recharge, and cannot safely be taken offshore does not become attractive because it is quieter. Quietness is a feature. Everything else is the purchase decision. The disconnect between investment and adoption is real. But the story is not simply a failure narrative. There are use cases where electric outboards are already the right product. Lakes with electric-only restrictions represent a growing and underserved category. In these environments, the choice is not between electric and gasoline. It is between electric and nothing. For those boaters, the Avatar line and Torqeedo's products are not compromises. They are the only option, and they are genuinely good ones. So you see, the technology trajectory is real. The Avatar models available in 2024 are meaningfully more capable than what existed in 2022. Dr. John Warner, Chief Customer Officer at American Battery Solutions, identified the broader structural driver clearly. The market is evolving rapidly in the US as battery technologies improve and costs continue to come down, making applications like leisure watercraft very viable solutions. The automotive segment leading the way in development is helping some of these adjacent electrification vehicles and vessels to take advantage of that market growth. The market is growing, but the scale and timing remain genuinely uncertain. It isn't hard to predict that the companies that will win this transition are the ones honest with their customers and themselves about the gap between where the product works today and where they need it to work in 5 years. Here is where this story ends and where the real question begins. The electric outboard industry has made a structurally rational bet, technically sound in its direction and probably right about the destination. But the charging infrastructure is not there, and the core recreational market has not converted. What we are watching is not a failure of technology. It is a failure of translation that we've seen over and over again between what engineers can build, what regulators are pushing for, what investors want to fund, and what the person at the boat ramp with a 200 horsepower Yamaha on the back of their truck actually needs on a Saturday morning. The real question isn't whether electric outboards will eventually win. It's whether the companies betting everything on that future will be the ones still standing when it arrives.